please welcome Judy Johansen.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Good morning. Hello, are you out there? Okay. I tell you, at 5:30 in the morning, there's not a lot of traffic, so it was pretty early for me. I normally don't get up this early. I have the luxury of living 2/10 of a mile from where I work. So that's quite nice. But I'm really, really honored to be here today, and I know that it takes a lot of effort to get up in the morning and to come to something like this, and I'm grateful for all of you for being here. And I wanted to mention a few things about myself, just for some context in terms of what I want to talk to you about today, because the lessons that I've learned in my various positions and leadership positions, I think have more dimension and more context if you understand how I ended up on my journey. So the only thing I ever planned on doing, when deliberately doing in terms of my career, was to be an attorney. I always wanted to be an attorney, and I think part of that was born out of the fact that my parents were school teachers, elementary, my mother elementary, my father high school, and I saw how hard they work and how little they made, and I thought, oh, I do not want to be a school teacher. I want to be an attorney. So I set my goals on doing that. And I never thought or planned on becoming the head of a federal agency, the Bonneville Power Administration. And I never imagined or aspired to be the CEO of a $9 billion company. And I certainly never intended to be a university president. But what I've learned is if you prepare yourself and you think about some of these key lessons that I've learned, maybe some doors will open for you and some opportunities will come to you that you weren't expecting. So there's a little bit of opportunity and going with the flow that has affected my life, and I think that it's something that you can think about no matter where you are in your career. So let me start with some stories. I want to tell you some stories this morning. One of the things that I think is important for anybody in their professional career, whether you're in a not-for-profit organization or a for-profit organization, is responsibility. You are responsible for your own opportunities and for preparing yourself for those. And I'll give you some examples. Back when I was a young lawyer in a law firm in Tacoma, Washington, I was working hard, getting up and going to work and doing what I needed to do, and they expected a lot of us. We had a certain expectation of the number of hours we would bill and all of that. But I got it in my mind that I needed to do more. I needed to do something to, round out what I was doing. So I became active in the American Bar Association, so my professional association. So for you, perhaps that's an engineering association or whatever it might be. And as a result of that, I ended up networking, much like you're doing here today. And I ended up meeting some folks who ultimately, perhaps 2 or 3 chapters down the road, became very important to me in my career. And not, again, anything that I intended at the time, but it worked out that way. So fast forward several years, I was practicing in energy law, and the opportunity came up for me to become the head of the Bonneville Power Administration. And that particular job is one that is a presidential appointment. And President Clinton was in his second term, and so it's a real honor to be able to have that opportunity. Well, unbeknownst to me, or I guess beknownst but not really cognizant of it, some of the colleagues that I had met through the American Bar Association ended up in that Clinton administration and were instrumental in putting in a good word for me for this job. And so you don't think about those connections, but if you stretch and step out and do some things just above and beyond going to work every day, do something in your profession or a networking like this, it's going to pay off, and you're responsible for doing that. No one's going to tell you to do that. Your boss isn't responsible for telling you to do that. Your spouse, your friend, whatever. It's your responsibility, and that's something that I stumbled onto, and I'm grateful that I did that. Another example for me is when I was a young lawyer. Again, I was working in a trade association, and I was a staff attorney, and I was the low man on the totem pole. And I don't know if any of you were here. Maybe I'm old enough to remember this, and maybe some of you are too. Do you remember the Washington Public Power Supply System nuclear? Right. So that was a big mess, and it ended up in a huge bond default and the biggest securities fraud litigation at the time in the nation. And so as a young attorney, I represented utilities, little public utilities and municipalities. And this trade association was asked by its members to get involved in the settlement of one of these lawsuits, which was the worst possible assignment that anybody could get. So being the low man on the totem pole, I got the tap on the shoulder to take this project on. Oh man, I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to herd all these cats and do this, but I did, and I stepped up to that assignment, and unbeknownst to me, at the end of the project, there was a man who had been participating in these discussions, and he happened to be the senior partner of a law firm. And after he met me working in this context on this assignment that nobody wanted, but that I had to step up and take, he offered me a job in the law firm that I ultimately went to. So again, sometimes those things that seem the worst in terms of responsibility or an assignment can really turn out to be opportunities, and especially if you step up to them. So don't shy away from that. So I think really what I'm trying to say is stretch and do things that you're uncomfortable doing, and don't forego the ability to prepare yourself for these opportunities when they arise. So that's just some examples of some things in my life. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is humility. And oh boy, have I had the opportunity to learn lessons about humility. And so will you, if you haven't already. I'm sure you have. But I guess what I would say here is, even you aren't perfect, right? So let me give you an example. When I went to Bonneville Power Administration, I thought I knew a lot. I was 39, almost 40 years old at the time. I had worked around that agency a lot as an outside attorney. I knew the people, and actually I had had a prior position, and so I knew what I wanted, and I especially knew where I was headed in terms of some of the personnel. And when I got there, I thought, well, I'm going to move this person here and this person there and da-da-da-da-da. Well, one of the HR people came up to me and said, you are prohibited by federal law from impacting the career of any senior executive for 6 months. I thought, 6 months? But I know what I want to do. I know I want to move this person here and get that guy out and get somebody else in. But this federal law prohibited me from doing what I knew I needed to do. Now, here's where I learned that I'm not perfect. So how many of you have done Myers-Briggs? You know, a lot of you, okay. So you might relate to this. My Myers-Briggs at the time, which has changed, was ENTJ. And the J part, the judgmental part of it, is probably the strongest element of my Myers-Briggs. And that part of it means that I'm quick to judge and I'm certain in my judgments. That's one of the elements of it. And what I have learned is this. The 6 months ended, that moratorium. And during those 6 months, I actually came to appreciate some people on that team that, had I moved with my instinct at the time, I think I would have regretted. I would have moved them out. And I learned that if I shut my mouth for 6 months and appreciate and understand people and take them for what they are as they come, I'm going to get a lot more out of my team than if I had just moved with that strong instinct. So my strength, J, is sometimes my weakness, and that is my Achilles heel. And And I want to just impart with you a plea that you try to understand what your weakness is. It could be your strength, like it is for me, and it may be a blind spot. It may be that somebody needs to point that out to you, or it could be a humbling lesson learned like it was for me. But that is very important, is that you know you're not perfect, and that you accept with humility what you really bring to the table. So let me move on to a couple of other stories. And these relate to leadership style. Okay. So my nature as a leader is to be collaborative, open, communicative, transparent, kind of low-key, joke around a little bit, that kind of thing. So that's my style. And that's my comfort zone. And in fact, I tend to, if you would talk, for example, to employees in other organizations where I've worked, I really place an emphasis on making sure that everybody in the organization, from the people in the executive leadership positions to those in the professional positions to those in the trades positions, all have the same information in a constant flow. So, as an example, when I was at PacifiCorp, 6-state utility, every month I'd host a conference call. And whether you worked in a coal steam plant, electric generating plant in Wyoming, or a coal mine in Utah, or a line distribution center in Washington, whatever it might be, you could call into this telephone call, this teleconference that I hosted. And in fact, employees were allowed to ask questions. So just spontaneous. There was no, pre-scripted anything. And believe me, I got some pretty interesting questions. This is a bit of a digression, but part of the culture of the utility at the time was when people retired, they got a gift, right? And again, we operated in Utah, Wyoming, Oregon, all around there. And one of the first questions I ever got as CEO was an unhappy employee out in Huntington, Utah, because we stopped giving out hunting rifles for gifts. And he was unhappy that we weren't giving out guns anymore. But in any event, that was important to him. And that was very important to people out there. But if you, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, my style is to be inclusive and to allow people to share their views and let me know what's important to them, because I think that makes me a better leader. But that style doesn't always work in every situation. And I'll give you an example there. So when I was at PacifiCorp, and we operated as Utah Power, it was the winter of 1999. And this huge snowstorm hit the Salt Lake area on Christmas Eve. And it knocked out the electricity for hundreds of thousands of our customers. It was a major snowstorm. And I was the CEO of the company, and after a day of outages, you sort of keep track of what's going on. After 2 days of outages, and the numbers are still quite large, you start to get a little nervous. So I went out to Utah to kind of hang out. But the one thing that I knew was that my open, inclusive leadership style is absolutely not what was needed at that time. At that time, you need command and control. Everybody needs to know what they're doing, almost in a military way. And I wasn't the general. I had to step out of the way, because the important people were the ones who understood the engineering, understood how to put those lines back up, understood how to take the customer calls. So my collaborative leadership style did me no good at that time. What was important is that I understood that I needed to step back and let the generals take over during the outage. And so that's just something that you should remember. I think as you move along in your own professions, your own careers, you'll have a leadership style that's your comfort zone. And yet you will be forced at times to step out of that and play different roles in terms of leadership style. And that's fine, but just understand that that one size does not fit all when it comes to leadership. Now, the next thing I want to mention is perspective. And this one I think is perhaps, I should have perhaps put this first, but in whatever you're doing in your career or your life, don't lose sight of what is really important. And I actually have two stories that I'd like to share with you on that point. The first one is when I was at PacifiCorp, we were part of Scottish Power. And Scottish Power was a publicly traded company on the London Exchange, the FTSE. And it was very proud of its heritage and its conservatism and et cetera, et cetera. It had a very good reputation in the financial markets and whatnot. And it purchased PacifiCorp. So I came in when Scottish Power owned PacifiCorp. Well, in 2000, the summer of 2001, the energy crisis had really come to a peak. Remember that? Remember when oil, was selling for, well, it was even more recently, $100 a barrel. Natural gas normally would sell for $2 an MMBTU, and it shot up to $100 an MMBTU. It was just incredible. And PacifiCorp lost $1 billion in that energy crisis, and a lot of utilities and a lot of companies did. So we lost $1 billion. As a result of that, we had to tell the market in the form of a profit warning. So many of you maybe work in a publicly traded company, and a profit warning is where you have the moment, literally within a day of your discovering something that's material, you have to disclose that publicly to the market. And at the time, in 2000, profit warnings were very rare. These days, they're coming out all the time because of the financial crisis, but they were very rare. And so it was a very dark day for Scottish Power when we had to go to the market internationally and announce that we had lost $1 billion. And it was a very trying time for our employees, because some of them were thinking, well, it's our fault, or do people think it's our fault? And so I spent that day going around meeting with employees in settings like this, in informal settings, and just talking with them, and it was tough. Well, the next day was September 11th of 2001. And when we woke up to the Twin Towers being bombarded by the terrorist airplanes, we all realized that no matter how much despair we had over what happened the prior day and our profit warning, nothing compares to the tragedy and the despair of the loss of human lives like we all experienced in 9/11. So it was a real eye-opener for me and for my colleagues to understand that it's so important in your work life not to lose perspective, even when things seem really bad. The perspective is important. And as a side note, I think back now on how it was that I got through that, and you all have your own stories. I remember we were over at the Lloyd Center, that's where our headquarters were, and people assembled. We just started assembling in a park across the street, and there was different office buildings. It wasn't all PacifiCorp. There were, I think, Kaiser Permanente's over there and Bonneville Power. But people held hands and they prayed. And you didn't know what faith somebody might have had standing next to you, or perhaps they had no particular faith or belief at all. But I have to say that it was the fellowship, I think, of that moment that really helped to bring home to me that despite the despair, we have something together, that fellowship that can get us through these moments. So that's a bit of a side note, but it was my own spiritual grounding that helped me get through that. And there was another incident that I would share with you around perspective. And that is, fast forward, let's say a year. About a year later, we were, moving along again, and we're focused on the task at hand and doing well in our scorecard. You know, you have your scorecard of your metrics and your financial metrics and your customer service metrics and all of that. I'm sure some of you have those that you think about all the time, and we're doing quite well. It's a beautiful summer day, and I get a call. I'm actually on vacation in Central Oregon with my family, and I'm still working at PacifiCorp, and I get a call. There's been a double fatality with our linemen in Utah. And that was the hardest thing I had ever done in my leadership career, and I hope to high heaven I never have to do that again. So I got on the airplane and I flew to Utah to be with the family of the, ended up it was one fatality and another seriously injured. And I sat in the living room with that family who had lost their son, husband, brother, uncle, father, and again, I gotta tell you, I prayed walking in that door, but they were a Mormon family. They are a Mormon family, and they were all there together, holding themselves together with their faith, and it was really a remarkable but very difficult moment, especially difficult for me because I had just lost my brother a month earlier, and I was comforting my parents in their grief only to have to go out to Utah to be with theirs. So again, sometimes things happen in your job that you don't expect, but they give you that perspective. It's great if your scorecard looks good. It's great if your financials are doing well, or if they're not. The profit warning, there's perspective, and something that you shouldn't lose sight of. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is understanding your own limits. So this is a little bit different from what I opened with, which is stretch and take advantage of opportunity, prepare yourself for opportunity, because windows of opportunity open and close all the time, and you may not even recognize it. But the other thing is, you all are here at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm guessing that you're going to rush off, some of you to work, some of you are going to rush off to whatever else is in your life, and you're very busy. And one of the things that I learned is I have personal physical limits that I really have to, when I say physical, I mean physical in the sense of my capacity to take on stress and my capacity to take on everything, which I suspect a lot of us in this room tend to want to do. But it's easy to get sucked in to a crazy life. It's so easy, and it feels good to be asked to do this and do that and all of that. But I remember one time early on in my career where my heart was racing and it wouldn't stop. And I thought I was dying. And I went to the emergency room and they hooked me up and they said, "Are you on cocaine?" And I said, "No." "And are you, eating amphetamines?" And I said, "No." And they said, "You're stressed out. You're stressed out." I'm like, "I am? Okay." So learn your limits, listen to your body, and take care of yourself. And that is a very important thing for leaders and for anybody, whether you are involved in your church or you're involved in extracurricular activity or you're very involved at work, taking on extra projects. Respect your limits and know what they are, because once you learn that, then you can really optimize your pace. And so it's something that hopefully you'll learn from me. And hopefully you won't end up in the emergency room with a doctor asking you if you're on cocaine, but it's something to do. So those are the messages that I wanted to deliver to you today in terms of some of the things I've learned through my career. Responsibility, you're responsible for preparing yourself for opportunity. Humility, understand that even you aren't perfect. I certainly have learned that for myself. Your leadership style, you'll have one, you'll have a comfort zone, and that's where you should operate from, but understand that sometimes you're going to need to stretch and go into different leadership modes depending on that situation. Perspective, don't lose sight of what's really important in life. And finally, understand your own limits. That's really important. So those are my messages. Now, I want to just digress a minute and talk about something that's on my mind. And this has to do with a talk that I gave yesterday at the university. And in doing this, I was describing our strategy for the future. And I just want to talk a little bit about the globe and what's going on in the world. So in preparing for this speech that I gave yesterday, I did a little research. And I went to the New York Times, and they have a blog called .Earth. And on this blog, I saw currently the population on our Earth, the human population, is about 6 billion people. And what it said is that by 2011, we'll be at 7 billion. And by 2050, we'll be at 9 billion. That's the expected trajectory of the population growth. So think about that. A huge increase, a 50% increase in the population on this Earth. And the thing that was interesting is that they say that the biggest age group will be teenagers, a horde of teenagers on our planet. Now, I have a 14-year-old. How many of you have survived teenagers in your house or have them currently? Right, okay. So teenagers in small doses are okay on balance. But a horde of teenagers on our planet may not be such a good thing unless we're ready as a society to educate them and to provide them with moral grounding. And here is the thing that was also interesting to me. Back in the 1950s, or after World War II, I should say, the population of Europe was 3 times that of Africa. By 2050, the population of Africa will be 3 times that of Europe. And Pakistan will be the 4th largest country in the world. So the changes in our globe and in the demographics of our globe may not be on your mind as you sit here in Hillsboro, Oregon today, but it's something we all need to be cognizant of, I think, because we, whether we like it or not, what we do here has an implication there, and what's happening there has an implication here. 23 million people in Africa are at risk of starvation as we stand here due to drought conditions that are in part driven by the changes in the climate. Now, you can't stand here in Oregon and say that we don't have a piece of that. So 23 million people are at risk of starvation in Africa. The camels, which are like the canary in the cave, are dying in Somalia, and there are no more livestock in Somalia. And these are some of the things that I recognize. And I just tell you this because there's us here, Intel and Marylhurst University and whatever, but there's this whole globe out there, and there's this whole youth bulge that we as a society need to be prepared to educate and to provide a moral grounding. And the last story I'll tell you is, speaking of ethical and moral grounding, and whatever we do, we own a piece of this. Have you heard of Darian Albert? Does that name ring a bell? Darian Albert? Well, about 2 weeks ago or a week ago, his name was above the fold on every national newspaper because he was the 70th teenager to be murdered in Chicago this year by teens. Teen violence is a huge issue for us in this country. And again, I would just urge that all of us, no matter what our walk in life is, that we think about what we can do. We're all a little drop in the flood, but what we can do to help repair and do something about the social fabric of our country. So I just added those 2 things for perspective, and Roger didn't know I was going to address those, but they're profound issues to me right now. It's important that we think not only about ourselves in the context of this leadership in here and now, but we think about the social fabric of our country and the incredible change that's occurring on our globe, and we prepare ourselves for dealing with that. So with that, I will bring my remarks to a conclusion. I hope that what I've said has given you something to think about in terms of your own career or your own life. And I will open it up for any questions or comments or challenges that you might have now that the caffeine has kicked in. Thank you. All right, questions? Yes?
You mentioned your Myers-Briggs test change.
Yes.
Was it just that judgment piece, or was it?
No.
Why do you think that?
Right, my Myers-Briggs. So the question is, why did my Myers-Briggs change and how did it change? So I was ENTJ. And the last two times I've taken Myers-Briggs, I have converted into an ISFJ. How's that for weird? But I think that what happened is, and this is just my armchair psychology, I think the change to the S is the thing that was important for me. I became a CEO of a federal agency. I became the CEO of a corporation with incredible accountability and responsibility. And so it became more important to me that I understood exactly how things were going to occur. And so what I normally would have been intuitive about, even though I'm still intuitive, I really want to understand in practical terms how things are going to occur. So the S part became more important to me as I took on more accountability. So I think that's what happened there. The F and the T, the feeling and the thinking, I think the reason I turned into a feeling, this is going to sound sexist, is I was around a lot. I've been in a man's world in terms of energy, utilities, etc. And I just feel like perhaps we needed more feeling than thinking. So I think that I was compensating for what I perceived to be a lack of feeling. So I obviously was borderline on some of those things, but J, I am strong on the J. And J is not just judgmental, it's planning. I mean, my calendar is planned out to 2012. That is, I know, sick, but I feel good about it. So, let's see, did I see another hand? Oh, yes.
What circumstances brought you to Marylhurst?
What circumstances brought me to Marylhurst? Well, you know, I have to say it was an epiphany. And it was really, anyway, what happened is in 2006, Scottish Power, so I was with Scottish Power as CEO of PacifiCorp, we sold the company to Warren Buffett. We sold PacifiCorp to Warren Buffett. And I had the opportunity to leave. So I did. And my husband and I have a 14-year-old. She was 12 at the time. I'd spent a lot of time, you know, career mom. So I thought, I'm just going to be a mom. I'm going to be on some boards. I'm fortunate and blessed to be on a lot of boards. And I'm just going to do that. And I was chairing the Lewis and Clark Board of Trustees. I'm an alum of the law school. And so I was kind of dabbling in higher ed. Well, my good friend Nancy Wilgenbush, who actually has, I don't know if any of you have heard Nancy speak, she was my predecessor at the university for 24 years, and she announced her retirement. And she invited me to campus one day to some event, and Phil Knight was there. And it was honoring Phil Knight because he had contributed for Marylhurst a significant sum of money so that people who did not have the means financial means to get an education could, and they're called Knight Scholars. And so it was to celebrate Phil Knight and his generosity, and the Knight Scholars were there, and they were single moms who were trying to improve themselves so that they could take care of their family. They were a dad who was wanting to get a degree so that he could be qualified for different whatever. I mean, it was just really touching. And I left that event and I said, this is where I belong. I belong in a place where education is serving people. Now, was I qualified? I don't know. So I went to Nancy and I said, I know the search for your replacement is well underway, But if they would entertain a non-traditional candidate, so somebody who didn't come from academia, I would love to do this. So I filled out my resume and applied, and I have a terminal degree, thank goodness, because you have to have one to be a university president. So a JD is a terminal degree. And here I am, and I love this job. It is absolutely, so it just happened. I didn't need a job, I wasn't looking, but I guess it's part of that opportunity happens thing that I was mentioning, and preparing yourself for stepping in when something feels right. So it was really like a bolt of lightning that I wanted to do it. So that's also being a J. Bolt of lightnings, they hit us a lot. Good. Any other questions? Yes, David.
How did you come to accept this speaking invitation today?
I don't know how I came to accept an invitation at 6:30 in the morning to speak to a group of professionals. Actually, the way it happened is, the reason that I'm here is a friend of mine, John Harker, is a friend of Roger's. And he introduced me, or introduced Roger to me, and they said, would you please come out and do this? And Nancy Wilgenbush, who I just mentioned, spoke at, I think, to this group a few times. So I think it seemed to John and perhaps Roger like it was my turn. And I thought, well, you know, even though I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning and drive out to a part of town that I'm not that familiar with, this sounds pretty neat to me. I would really like to meet the people who come here and who are interested in hearing me. But I don't want to meet you because you want to meet me. But I enjoy being with professionals and people who have the initiative to get up and do something like this before they go to work. I think it's a really cool thing, and I commend all of you for that. So, speaking of that, it's 20 after, and I'm told that I turn into a pumpkin at 20 after. So, thank you all very much for listening to my ramblings this morning. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope that as you walk out of here today, you'll reflect on some of these lessons as they affect your own lives. So, thank you.